Did you hear about the little boy who was choking one Wednesday night, and the preacher quickly ran over and grabbed him and did the Heimlich maneuver, and out popped a penny, rolled across the floor. His mother said, "Oh, thank you, you saved our son." His father said, "No, that preacher's just going after a penny." Whenever you hear the story of the widow's mite, you probably think, well, it's going to be a giving sermon. The preacher needs a little bit more money. He might use words like stewardship, which is a fancy church word, but you just interpret that as, give us some more money. But that's not what it's about. Rather, it is about gratitude and thanksgiving. Stewardship literally means how we use our possessions and how wise we are with those. It is about having grateful hearts. I remember some time ago I was in a church and we were trying to raise $1 million for a renovation. We got together and we were talking about who could give the lead gift and how we might round up this money. And we were talking, and finally my friend Ed said, "We need to stop this." And I said, "What do you mean, Ed?" He said, "We're focused so much on money." He said, "What we need to focus on is the hearts of our people. We need to share with them the need. We need to let them know what we're doing with this money." He said, "If we can touch their hearts, their wallets will follow." And I think my friend Ed was right. Too often we focus on money just like the world focuses on money. Have you watched with interest where Amazon might put their new headquarters? Dozens of cities around our country offered billions of dollars in tax incentives that might get these 50,000 jobs and might get that bragging right to say, "We have Amazon." And finally they settled in New York and around Washington, D.C. They're in Northern Virginia. And they're giving millions of dollars for these folks to come. Why did they do so much? Because we are so focused on money. We also focus on it in our own lives. Have you ever noticed that it depends on which side of the giving you're on, what you focus about? You might be planning to go to a wedding reception, and I heard someone say one time at one, "I bet they're just going to give us that chicken again." We always have that chicken at these things. And then later on, I remember this fella, his daughter was getting married, and they were meeting with a caterer, and his wife told me that the first thing he said was, "Well, how much for the chicken? We want the chicken." It depends on which side you're on. In church, it's the same thing. When we think about giving, oftentimes people come to me and say, so-and-so might give a large gift. We focus on what others might do. I never forget one lady that was in a previous church, and we were doing that fund drive, and we had hoped she'd give some money, and she kept telling me about another lady. "You ought to go over and visit her. She could give. She's got some money." We're always focused on the other person, but when it comes to us, and we say the church needs more, we say, well, maybe the church should do a little bit more with what it has. It depends on the focus, doesn't it? Jesus notices giving. Jesus sat down and watched what was going on. And the first thing he noticed were some scribes, some Pharisees, some folks that liked to get attention. He said they liked to walk along in long flowing robes, and they liked for people to stop and to greet them and to give them all kinds of respect. And Jesus was probably watching these people, and they had means and they could give large amounts. And when they gave, they'd go over to these urns. They were big trumpet-looking things, and they would take their money and they would hold it up and they would drop it in so everybody could see it falling down into the collection plate. And Jesus said, they devour widows' houses. They're supposed to care for others, and they are the ones who are doing poorly. They take in from everyone else, and they're so focused on money and focused on what they get. And even when they give, they make a big show of it. But Jesus kept watching. And a widow with only 2 coins, what the King James calls a mite. comes and drops in all she has, and Jesus stops it all and says, "Look, did you see it? Did you see it?" They all gave out of their abundance, and she gave out of her need. You see, when it comes to being thankful and giving out of our thanksgiving, we often focus on need. Sometimes we focus on our own needs. We look at what we have and we say, well, we have these bills and this and this and this and this. And when we focus on ourselves, we will never give generously. This widow, though, she focused on the needs of others. She literally had only 2 coins to rub together, and yet she gave it all. It is a well-documented fact that the poor in our country often give the highest percentage of their income. They see the need that is out there, and so they give. This past week, I was summoned to the home of one of our homebound members. Now, when I say I was summoned, I literally was. She told me, "I need you to come visit me this week." And usually when someone does that, they have a need. Usually there is an illness or there's something going on in the family, and they want prayer, and I'm glad to go and I'm glad to pray. But I went to this lady, and we talked for a while, and she talked about her family, she talked about this, she talked about that, and finally she said, "You're probably asking yourself why I wanted you to come over today." And I said, "Well, yes, what is it we need to do today?" And she took out an envelope, and she handed it to me. She said, "Now, Pastor, I get so much per week for my groceries. I have a stipend." She said, "And I've been trying to hold back on those groceries because I wanted to give a special gift to our church at Thanksgiving. I know we've got White Christmas coming up, and I know that mission offerings are going to be taken, and so I've been holding a little bit back and trying to eat a little bit less." And she gave me an envelope with a group of $10 bills in it, a generous offering. And as she gave it to me, she said, "Pastor, I just wanted to make sure I did my part." She quit looking at her own need and was looking at the needs of the church and of the community. I sent out a letter a few weeks ago telling you that our church was in good shape, that in 2018, we did great, and we didn't quite make our budget, but we almost did, and we paid all of our bills, and our mission gifts were up, and we were able to do so much. And I sent out that letter, and I wonder if I should have sent it, because the next week our offerings were off. I don't know if I should have told you we were doing great. We're 6 weeks into our new church year, and we're about $60,000 behind our goal. Over $10,000 a week we're behind. We have great needs at our church, but I don't want you to look at the needs and think, well, they just need money. But I want you to think about what goes on here at First Baptist. Every Monday morning, we get together as a staff. Larry's there, and Justin's there, and Melissa's there, who's out with the kids, and James is there, and our ministers get together, and we talk about our church, and we talk about the needs in our church family. We talk about who is sick and who needs prayer, who might need encouragement. And it is an honor to sit with these men and these women and to hear their heart they have for you and the heart they have for God. And the gifts we give make that possible. Every week I walk down through our preschool, and the children are so happy, and they're learning, and they come to chapel, and they sing songs about Jesus, and they sing to the top of their lungs. And I think about the gifts you give that make it possible. Our wonderful Wednesday program is growing, and we have children here every Wednesday, and parents are calling and saying, our kids are glad and happy to be at church. And your giving makes that possible. I walk through Sunday school each week, and I hear men and women teaching the Bible, and I see the literature they're using, and I think about that our gifts make that possible. I go over to Iredell Christian Ministry. I'm on the board there with several other of our church members, and our church was a founding church in this effort, and I see the good that's going on in our community, and I think the gifts that you give make that possible. I could go on and on, but you get the point. When we see the need and our hearts are touched, we give. I think about this widow who gave all she had, and I remember the story about a very successful businessman. He was asked to give a testimony in church, and he got up and he said, "You know that I'm very successful and I've done very well in life, but what you don't know is when I was a young man, I went into a church. I had not been in church, and I heard the gospel preached, and I heard about God's love, and they took up the offering, and all I had was $10 in my name, but I decided I would give it all." And he said, "I think that God has blessed me because I gave everything I had that day." A little lady in the back said, "I dare you to do it again." We like this story of the widow's mite. Stories of people who give their all, but when it comes to what we have today, are we willing to give still? I don't think it was just need, though, that motivated this widow. I think she was motivated because of the blessings in her life. You might say, "Well, Pastor, she didn't have much. She was a widow. Her husband had died. She only had a couple of coins. But with what she had, she gave." We tend to focus so much on the negative, don't we? Our kids are driving us crazy, and we forget that we prayed that we might have children. You spill coffee on your shirt, and you get a little frustrated, but you've probably got other shirts. You have to park way back in the back of the mall during the Christmas season, and you're gripe because you got to walk so far, but you have a car and you have gas and you're going to buy presents. What do we focus on? You might say, "Well, leftovers again?" Well, don't you know that that means that you have so much that you couldn't eat it all the first time? We are so blessed. We are so blessed. This past Thursday, I was down at this senior lunch, and that's such a wonderful, fun group to go and to be with. And I happened to sit with Max Lewis. And Max, it was your birthday that day. And I remember, and we were talking, and Max told me, "I want to live to be as old as my mom." And he told me a little bit about his mom and how much he loved her. And he began to use a word. He said, "My mom used to talk about sufficiency. I have a sufficiency." That was her word. And I remember that when I was young, my mom used to tell us that when we had eaten, you should say, "I've eaten sufficiently, thank you." Sufficient. Enough. This widow did not look at what she didn't have, but rather she said, "I have enough in life that I might share." Think of the blessings in this Thanksgiving season. And then our giving comes out of gratitude. Some years ago, a church was trying to increase their giving, and so they hired a consultant. The consultant came in and said, "I'll need to look at your giving records." And the pastor said, "Well, I don't look at those, but I guess you can." He said, "Well, I need to see kind of the giving patterns before I can help you in your church." And the pastor said, "Well, we've got a lot of folks on fixed incomes, and I don't know what you can find. Don't expect too much there." And the fellow took the books, and he went away, and he came back the next week, and he said this to the committee. He said, "Did you know that 50% of your top givers are widows on fixed incomes, and they give over 60% of your budget?" He said, "Here's my advice to you." He said, "I suggest that you go and visit these generous ladies, and you find out why they give so generously, and then you try to infect the rest of your people with that generosity." I think that's what the story of the widow's mite is about. It's about someone who is so grateful for life that they go and they give their all. And who sees it? Not the folks that think they're doing so great. Who sees it? Jesus. Jesus stops it all and says, "Stop and look. That widow has given not just her might, but of her strength, of her Mite. You see, true thanksgiving will change our hearts. It changes the way we see things. There's a story about a boy who was sitting on some steps. He was blind. He had his hat out in front of him, and there wasn't much in it. And a man is walking by, and he puts a few coins on it, but he also picks up the sign that says, "Blind, please give." And he turns the sign around, he writes something, and the boy doesn't know what has happened, but all of a sudden the hat begins to fill up. Later on, the man comes back by, and the boy says, "Are you the man that wrote something on my sign?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, what did you write?" And he said, "Well, I only wrote the truth. I wrote what you had said, but I wrote it in a different way." He said, "I wrote this: today is a beautiful day, but I cannot see it." Both signs told of your blindness, but the second sign reminded people of their blessings. Seeing that child, they knew that he could not experience all they were experiencing. But I think that sign probably pointed even deeper. That it is always a beautiful day. That there are always blessings. We just don't always see them. But when we focus on those blessings, they change our very heart. I remember some years ago, I called my father, and I was kind of in a down mood, and I asked Dad how he was doing, and he was doing great. And I knew Dad had lost my mom and that he was suffering, but he was in a good mood. And I said, "Well, Dad, why are you doing great?" And he said, "Well, you know, so-and-so came over and brought me some lunch today," and I sat down and I talked with them, and I've been friends with them for so long, and that was just such a nice thing. And this evening I'm going over to your sister's house, and it's so nice of her to have me out, and I get to see some of my grandchildren and my great-grandson. He said, "Life's just really good. People are just doing things for me left and right." And I said, "Dad, people are always doing nice things for you." And he said, "Nelson, they're doing them for you too." And I stopped. And I began to make a list of all of the nice things that had happened to me that day. And my list was just as long as my dad's, but my problem was I was just over on my negative list that day of what hadn't gone right. But when I turned and changed to gratitude, it changed my heart, and it changed my outlook and my way of seeing things. And when that happens with us individually, and we change and we begin to be grateful people, and that overflows into our world, it changes the world. Miss Klein is a first grade teacher. She's a first grade teacher in a deteriorating school in a deteriorating neighborhood where the kids have little to be thankful for. But she decided she would do like she would do in any other school, and at Thanksgiving she would talk about the blessings of life, and she asked the kids to draw a picture. Most of them were just kids, so they just drew a turkey, that thing for Thanksgiving. A few of them drew some tables with food on it and some people sitting around, and Douglas drew a picture of a hand. Douglas was a little four-going boy. He kind of lived in Miss Klein's shadow. Everywhere she went, he was like right up underneath her. It's obvious that he was insecure. She looked at it and she showed it to the class, and she said, "Douglas, this is an interesting picture of a hand." And one little boy, Jose, said, "Well, I know what that is. That's a picture of a farmer's hand." He said, "The farmers help us get food, and that's a hand of a farmer." And Miss Klein said, "That's a good interpretation." And then Lavinia said, "No, I think that's the picture of the police officer's hand. You know, we have a police officer at our school, and he is kind, and he talks to us, and he makes sure that we're safe here." And Miss Klein said, "That's a good interpretation." And Robert, who obviously was a little theologian, said, "Oh no, that's a picture of God's hand, because God gives us all blessings." And finally, Miss Klein turns to Douglas, who's standing right up beside her, and says, "Douglas, what's the picture of the hand about?" And he softly says, "Miss Klein, that's your hand. That's your hand." And she remembers all of the times that she has to take him by the hand and pull him out from behind her and sit him in the desk, or take him by the hand and help him to the cafeteria because he's so shy and doesn't want to go get in the line. Of all the times that she's taken him by the hand and pulled him in and hugged. Your hand, Miss Klein, is your hand. When we hear this story of the widow's mite, and Jesus points this lady out and says, look at her. See what her hand is doing. I think Jesus is also calling us to look at our hands. What is in our hand? What can we give? For Jesus calls us to be his hands and his feet in this world today. This is Thanksgiving. It is a time to be grateful, but even more, it's a time to open our hands in giving to those who are in need.